It's Thursday, September 25th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Hermes. Today on the show, we are talking about another possible government shutdown. That's right, we are back to our national game of chicken that could mean hundreds of thousands of people will be out of work or won't be paid for going to work or could lose vital services like access to money for food, healthcare, or Social Security. We're going to talk about what is happening here. This time around, at least, what both sides want in this fight on paper, and why both Democrats and Republicans might actually want a shutdown right now, even if it's going to hurt a lot of people. But first, make sure you're following or subscribe to the show, whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. If you're a watcher on YouTube, sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack. It is just $5 a month to get access to all sorts of great bonus content I've got up there, and it helps keep this show running. The latest article that was up yesterday is all about how Donald Trump has been obsessed with the idea of good versus bad genes and autism for a long time, and how we're seeing those two things collide right now in our American healthcare and science systems. But if you want access to that, it is just $5 a month. Otherwise, please share the show on social media. It's Mims Newspod. That's MIMS Newspod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Hermes on Twitter and Bluesky, and at Grant Hermes TV on everything else. All right, let's get to the show. I try hard on Make It Make Sense to give you a complete picture of the biggest stories, but I'm only one guy, and staying up to date with events around the world can be difficult for anyone when it's impossible to consult a single source for the full story. And with our social media algorithms sending us the versions of the news that only reinforce our own biases, it can be hard to know if you're actually informed, even for me. And that's why I've been using Ground News. Ground News is an app and a website that combines news from around the world all in one place, so you can compare coverage from every news source, and you can see if they have a political bias, how reliable their reporting is, and who owns them. My favorite feature is the blind spot feed. It highlights news disproportionately covered by one side or the other, so I can make sure I know how the news is being covered. It's like Make It Make Sense for Make It Make Sense. Right now, if you subscribe through my link in the show notes, you'll get 40% off the Vantage subscription. It's the one I use to get unlimited access to every feature, and it is just $60 for the entire year or $5 a month when you use that link. Your subscription helps Make It Make Sense, too. We get a cut of this subscription, but you're also helping Ground News make the news more transparent. Again, use the code in the show notes to get 40% off your Vantage subscription to Ground News. All right. Let's get back to the show. On October 1st, just 6 days from when I'm recording this, the U.S. government is going to shut down. This is like the fifth one of these that I've covered since starting Make It Make Sense just last summer. And I'd like to say that this one is boring, but it's not. First, I think it's important to put what happens during a government shutdown front and center here because they're bad. Hundreds of thousands of federal employees are furloughed. Like in 2018, 850,000 postal workers were furloughed for the shutdown then. Or in 2013, 350,000 civilian employees at the Department of Defense were furloughed. Military pay is often suspended. And while official government employees and service members generally get that money back if they have to work and don't get paid, hundreds of thousands of government contractors who we rely on for a lot of defense services, but also civilian things like medical, scientific, and just general jobs like building maintenance don't get paid back. Shutdowns also cause strain across government agencies, specifically things like air traffic control, which is already dangerously understaffed and using really old equipment right now. Environmental and food safety checks get halted, putting a lot of people at risk. And in 2013, the shutdown caused the IRS to have a backlog of 1.2 million income verifications, which meant people lost houses that they were trying to buy or to stay in. Businesses that needed loans to open or stay afloat couldn't get them, and billions of dollars in tax returns weren't returned on time. And I know that that's not happening right now, but it's still billions of dollars that didn't get out to people who might have been planning on it. And then there's the stuff that I think is actually the most important here. Not that that stuff isn't harmful and important. It's just that these things are, when the government shuts down, it cuts off access to the social safety net. And these are things that help the poor, hungry kids, help senior citizens, and generally make living in poverty in the U.S. a little less miserable. We know SNAP benefits, or sometimes called food stamps, get delayed during shutdowns, meaning money people need to prevent going hungry doesn't get to them. The same goes for WIC benefits, money that's meant to help women, infants, and children get things like baby formula or baby food. Social Security payments and verifications are delayed or sometimes stopped altogether, meaning seniors who rely on that income that they paid into while they worked can't get access to it. And it's often the only source of money that those people have to pay for groceries or utilities or rent. And then there's healthcare. Thousands of Medicare and Medicaid recipients could be turned away from receiving care, or they could be denied coverage because employees at the center of Medicare and Medicaid services couldn't go to work because there was a government shutdown. And that's a lot of harm being done to a lot of people, and it's frustrating that this is the kind of system that we have to have every few months. Millions of people across the country have to go through this same thing, or at the very least have to start worrying about this same thing time and time again. So with that in mind, let's talk about what is happening in Congress right now, and if they're doing anything at all to stop that from happening. Well, first, Republicans want to keep funding levels exactly where they are for the government right now, except for one thing. They want to add around $85 million for more security for members of Congress, the executive branch, and the Supreme Court in the wake of Charlie Kirk's death, but also an increase in threats against public officials over the last few years. But after that, they just want to kick the rest of the funding down the road to November 20th, a thing Congress, no matter who is in charge, loves to do, especially for that time of the year. Sometimes they push it to further around Christmas and Hanukkah or the end of the year. Sometimes it's close to Thanksgiving, like this one. But either way, congressional leaders think that using the threat of keeping members at work instead of being able to go home for the holidays will force them into a deal that maybe they wouldn't have made otherwise, but a deal's a deal. It's only ever sort of worked, and by that I mean we haven't had a real budget after one of those stunts in a long time. It's always been something that's called a continuing resolution, or a CR. It's what you'll hear it be called. And it just, again, means kicking the can down the road. Republicans want a CR passed this time because they're happy with where funding levels are. They got their big budget victory over the summer when they passed the big beautiful bill, and it's worth pointing out that Democrats did the same thing about a dozen times under Biden. Now, there are other reasons that Republicans might want to force this thing through to avoid a government shutdown, but before I talk about that, let's talk about what the Democrats are asking for here. Democrats want more funding for Medicare and the Affordable Care Act. They want to claw back some of the money that was taken from the ACA under the big beautiful bill. They want to extend some tax credits for healthcare premiums, which are set to expire November 1st. I'll talk about those in a second. And increase access to the federal healthcare market to the tune of around $705 billion added to the national deficit over the next 10 years, according to the Congressional Budget Office, which also says that could help more than 6 million people keep their health insurance. And it's also one of these things that while the CBO says it'll cost more in the long run, those costs might actually offset, not add to the cost of the big beautiful bill, because of the healthcare cuts that were expected to cost more than $3 trillion in the BBB over the next decade, and kick more than 10 million people off their healthcare coverage might not happen if the Democrats get their way. The math on this is a little confusing and convoluted, and I'm not going to dive into it all here. Now, the Senate tried to pass a version of this last week, but because it's a funding bill, it needs 60 votes to pass, not just a majority of 51, and it failed. And now there doesn't seem to be any path forward in the House or the Senate on new talks, because after agreeing to meet with Democratic leaders this week, President Trump backed out of the deal at the last second on Tuesday, accusing them in a very long Truth Social post of trying to give health care to undocumented immigrants, to publicly fund trans surgeries, and allow dead people on the Medicare rolls. It was a lot of nonsense, frankly. But the official line from the White House and Republicans right now is that Democrats want to do these healthcare things to let undocumented immigrants use the ACA or Medicaid or Medicare. It's like a 2-second search to find out that that's not true, because undocumented immigrants aren't eligible for the ACA or Medicaid or Medicare. Now, who might lose coverage are lawful immigrants, many of whom have temporary protected status or are refugees or asylum seekers who do have access to these things, and courts still recognize their statuses, but the administration has gone to great lengths to try and say that those people are actually in the U.S. illegally because of things the Biden administration did. So if that's what the White House means, they're not saying it, they're just saying illegals. But even with that, what the Democrats and Republicans are really fighting over right now is who's going to own the shutdown if it happens. And that gets us to what's going on behind the scenes. Here's what Speaker of the House Mike Johnson had to say just this week.
A rare thing in Washington as well, but that's what's happening here. What they're trying to argue for, not to get too deep in the weeds, is they're trying to insist that the Obamacare premium subsidies be continued. That's a December policy debate and decision, not a September funding matter. So they're trying to insert unrelated matters into the middle of a clean government extension, and I don't think that's going to work. If the government is shut down because they make that their last stand, it will solely be blamed on Democrats, because we're not playing politics with this at all. We're just trying to keep the lights on.
So Johnson is right there. This is inserting policy into a funding bill that's also, by the way, full of policy, and it's also, how politics works. And as Chuck Schumer pointed out when Senate Majority Leader John Thune said the same thing last week, 93% of people on ACA coverage right now will see their premiums go up on November 1st. That's around 20 million people. Most of them make less than $100,000 a year. A third of them make less than $50,000, and an increase in healthcare costs could break those families. So for Johnson to say that that's a December discussion when those costs would spike in November is just willfully ignoring the reality of what would happen. But the loss of coverage is also kind of part of a plan here too. It might not be Johnson's, but it is a part of a plan. If premiums spike, people will drop their ACA coverage, meaning more than just the 4 million people who will lose access right away will drop off the rolls. And that was part of the plan of the big, beautiful bill in the first place, to cut federal healthcare funding to, in their minds, force people to work to get employer-covered healthcare. Except we know that the vast majority of people on just the Medicaid part of federal healthcare coverage work. 64% either work full-time or part-time, 10% are disabled and can't work, another 12% are full-time caregivers, and 7% are students. Just 8% of people on Medicaid are what Republicans call able-bodied non-workers. But what will happen is when these people lose their healthcare coverage because it becomes too expensive, a lot of them will stay uninsured because part of the big, beautiful bill itself was adding a lot of paperwork to getting re-verified or verified to receive federally subsidized healthcare. And we know when that happens, people tend to fall through the cracks. So by denying the Democrats what they want here, Republicans are actually ensuring that what they put into motion stays in motion. Now, Democrats also might want to force a shutdown here because it's their chance to try to stand up to Trump in a way that they were criticized for not doing the last time we had one of these shutdown fights. Trump's polling right now is bad. His approval rating is about as low as it can go right now, and he's not winning support on any issue outside of border security. Democrats, on the other hand, are trusted by most Americans when it comes to health care, by almost 2-1. So by linking their pushback against Trump to a winning issue for them, they think they might be able to start digging out of this political hole that they're in while blaming the shutdown on Republicans. Now, Republicans, on the other hand, might actually want this shutdown for two key reasons. First, it'll let the Trump administration carry out a mass firing of more federal employees. The director of the Office of Management and Budget, a guy named Russell Vought, said in a memo to employees this week that if the government shuts down, mass reductions in force could take place starting next month. Now, this is a thing that Vought desperately wants. He was a co-author of Project 2025, which is the ultra-conservative playbook that Trump said he didn't know anything about during the campaign, but has now implemented about half of the plans that are in it. Vought hates federal employees. His plan in Project 2025 was to reduce the federal workforce by hundreds of thousands and keep employees who stay afraid so that they stay loyal to Trump. Here he is talking about what he wants the day in the life of a federal employee to be back in 2020.
We want the bureaucrats to be traumatically affected. We want, when they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work. because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. We want their funding to be shut down so that the EPA can't do all of the rules against our energy industry because they have no bandwidth financially to do so. We want to put them in trauma.
So, yeah, I don't know who that ghoul is who laughed at that, but that's bad. No matter how you feel about the federal government, you shouldn't want people to be afraid to come to work or to be traumatically affected or to be put in trauma. It's just wrong on like a human level. But that is what Vought wants. So a shutdown like this could be a golden opportunity for him and the administration to keep carrying out the hollowing out of the federal government. And when the news broke about the memo, Democratic Minority Leader in the House, Hakeem Jeffries, said, "Listen, Russ, you are a malignant political hack. We will not be intimidated by your threat to engage in mass firings. Get lost." That might be the harshest thing that I have heard from him in a long time. And we'll see what happens, but there is one other reason that Republicans might actually want a shutdown, and it's the Epstein Files. You see, this week, it looks like the discharge petition to force Speaker of the House Mike Johnson to put the bill to get the DOJ to release the files up for a vote now has the votes to pass. And if you forgot what this is, a discharge petition is something that members of the House can put up, can sign, that would force the Speaker of the House, who controls which votes make it to the floor, to do what they want, to force him to put something up for a vote. And the reason that it looks like this might have the votes to pass is a special election in Arizona was just won handily by a Democrat, which means the GOP's already very slim majority in the House just got slimmer. And the petition will now have 218 votes, which means that it has enough to pass. And if it passes, the vote to release the files will likely also pass. But in order for her to vote, she has to be sworn in, and she can't do that if the House isn't in session. So Johnson has now instead stopped all voting on Monday and Tuesday next week, sending the House out of session on the 2 key days before the shutdown deadline, and said this week that they won't return before the deadline, meaning the bipartisan group of lawmakers who want the files released likely won't be able to hold voting on the shutdown hostage in exchange for voting on the Epstein Files. It's a wild moment in American politics, because essentially what's happening here is the Speaker of the House, who maintains that he wants justice to be done on the Epstein saga, is actively getting in the way of that. And it's something that millions of Americans want, and a winning number of members of Congress on both sides of the aisle also want to be sure that justice is served. It's one of the only bipartisan things that's actually happening right now in the country, and Mike Johnson seems willing to shut down the entire federal government to, at the very least, protect the feelings of the United States president, and at worst, protect a group of wealthy elites who are accused of abusing girls and young women. Like I said, it's wild. And now, Johnson and Republican leadership say they adjourned the House because they got their work done in passing a funding bill this week over to the Senate, and now it's in their hands, and forcing members to come back to work would be a concession that they didn't actually get all their work done. There's just too much happening under the surface here on all of this to think that that's the only reason on both sides of the aisle. And in the meantime, it looks like we are barreling for a shutdown that's going to hurt a lot of people. All right. That's it for the show today. Please rate and review on whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Like, subscribe, leave a comment below if you're a watcher on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack. It's just $5 a month. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims Newspod. That's MIMS Newspod. All one word on every platform. I am at Granthermes on Twitter and Bluesky, and at Granthermes TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Granthermes, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.